Hi, I'm Marc Sumner, CEO and founder of Robertson Sumner. Welcome to the Channel Chat podcast, where we will share learnings, best practices and failures with some of the biggest names in the IT industry, all with the simple aim of being the go-to place for IT sales professionals and managers to learn from others with the ultimate goal of maximising performance and growing the channel. Hello, it's Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast, and I'm here today with Marc Power, Director of Technical Sales for Data and AI at Microsoft. Hello, Marc. How are we doing?
Hey, Marc. I'm good. You?
Yeah, really good, really good. So thanks very much for coming in, Marc. As I do with all the guests on the show, I normally go through their background first. I'm hoping you can kick off with your career at, I think, was it Fitness First, if I'm right? Wasn't it started there?
That was the first job, yeah. So probably just take one step back. So prior to joining Fitness First, I was studying, which is a loose term for what I was actually doing. But in relevance to what I'm doing today, I failed business studies. I got an F in business studies, GCSE. I got an F in IT. I would like to think not for a lack of talent, just for a lack of trying. The penny just hadn't really dropped how important education was at the time.
And how old were you then? 16?
16, yeah. And then in that sort of decision do I go to sixth form or do I go into an apprentice? So I was looking at being an electrician or a carpenter, those sorts of things, which I had no skills in. That would have been an absolute disaster. So I went into sixth form and I picked what I felt was the easiest subjects at the time. PE, drama. I was the only boy out of 30 women in drama. There's a reason for picking that one. And just tried to cruise through and then really struggled to think about going to university. I've got a twin sister, Claire, and she was the academic. She's a teacher. She was naturally gifted in that area. I just couldn't compete. So my dad said to me, "You need to go and find yourself a job. You'll waste time and money if you go to university," which was hard for me to argue with, considering the track record I had. Yeah, it was disaster. I walked up. I lived in Hayes, so I went up to Uxbridge High Street, printed off a couple of CVs, and started handing those around. And I went into Fitness First. And went into like a very quick sort of 15-minute interview, like a couple of, not even competency-based questions, but let's just check this person's not a serial killer, I think was the main sort of conversation. So they said to me, look, you can start on Tuesday. And I had a loose idea of what it was, what I thought it was. Went home, Dad, I got a job, brilliant. First question he asked me, what's it paying? I thought, I don't know. I didn't check. And then so I went in first time on the Tuesday, meet the boss, Debbie, and she handed me a set of cleaning products. And I thought I was going to be doing like a fitness class or something. No, I was cleaning the machines. So we went through like the first week, and I got to the end of the week, and I still hadn't told my dad it was unpaid. And I thought I'm going to have to really step this one up and just.
When was the first time you actually realised it was unpaid?
End of day one. Yeah, really? End of day one, and I realised this is in exchange for free membership, and that just. No, it wasn't the most important thing in life at the time. So, I'd said to Debbie, look, I really need to change this so that I get some form of salary off the back of it, because I need to find a job, otherwise won't have the time. So she said to me, look, actually, there's one other part to the job you can do. It's marketing. So as long as you cover the marketing angle, I'll pay you a salary. I thought, great, okay, I'm interested in that. So unfortunately, marketing meant wear an inflatable heart suit in the middle of Uxbridge High Street and hand out leaflets to convince people to go and have a tour of the gym. Completely demoralising. One of the hardest things I've done. Not hardest because it's not difficult to hand leaflets out, just ego, pride, putting all that to one side. And I can vividly picture now handing the leaflets out in the middle of Uxbridge High Street. Luckily, you couldn't see my face. And my mum and dad walking through the shopping centre and handing a leaflet to my parents, thinking, oh my God, if they could see me in here now. And that was...
How old were you then?
18. 18, yeah. And that was when the penny really dropped to think, what are you doing? What you really need to sort yourself out. So I'd gone back to the gym and I said to Debbie, hey, Debbie, look, I really want to try and move into that sales team, because that's where all the fun looked like it was occurring as well. And I was by no stretch of the imagination a bodybuilder, or I was a weaselly 18-year-old, so I wasn't going to be able to pull off a fitness instructor look. So I said to Debbie, look, if I put my name on sort of 1 in 5 of these leaflets, how about anybody that comes back with a leaflet with my name on, can I give them a tour of the gym? And then can you pay me a commission for anyone I give a tour of that joins? And she said, no, but if you can get 20 people to sign up in a month, then I'll let you interview for a sales role.
What made you think of actually asking, because you hadn't been in sales before, what made you actually think of asking to get a commission on sales at that point?
Because every time you went to the change room in that gym down the stairs, you'd walk through the sales office for a quicker entrance for staff, and you could see their whiteboard with how many tours they'd done, how many had turned into appointments, how many appointments had turned into closes, and what their close rate was. And then they'd literally put their commission really crudely up on a whiteboard, almost like that pride badge for the rest of the teams to see how much they'd made that month. And I couldn't believe people were making thousands of pounds off the back of just getting people to sign up for £20 joining fee and £15-20 a month. So I thought, I can do that. I can convince someone to spend 20 quid on their health and fitness. I was thinking, I've got no money and I'm spending 50 quid in the local nightclub on a weekend. So I could just say to someone, look, how much do you spend in a nightclub? If your health and fitness is that important to you, I'm sure it's a small investment by comparison to what you spend on clothes and everything else. So I'd sort of convinced myself, I can do this. So I had that conversation with Debbie, hit my 20 sign-ups and fairly quickly. And then I'd gone for an interview with her and she said, look, fine, you can start. So I'd got a job. It was, I'm trying to think exactly what the salary was at the time. I naturally won't talk about salaries now, but at the time I think it was about £11,000 a year base salary. And then commission was capped out at £6,000. And genuinely, in my mind, I'd made it.
Yeah.
I'd made it. And
You're balling then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember seeing that Debbie, as a general manager, had a Toyota Corolla car parked downstairs, which was the company car. I remember sitting there thinking, yeah, one day. One day, yeah. If I can get that job as a GM, then I'll get the company car. I'll probably be able to get a mortgage on that salary too. I'll be set. I'll be able to look after family for that. Because my expectation has just been so low on failing pretty much everything at school and struggling to just go and get a job in a high street store. And I thought, right, that's where the ceiling was for me.
Do you think that was because of your grades at school, or your aspirations, or what do you think? What gave you that sort of impression at that young age?
I think expectations, because I didn't have an expectation or a view of what that world looked like. I hadn't got anywhere near the tech industry at that stage, and hadn't really had any friends, uncles, aunties that were in that type of profession. Right. Most were in really good labour jobs, so I hadn't really met anybody that I would look at and aspire to be. So it just hadn't even entered my world really.
Okay, so you obviously you stayed there. How long were you there for? Fitness First?
I think I was there just over a year, and I think I'd got to the stage of about a year, and a company moved into the same building. So we had a target of about 50 sign-ups a month. That was what we had to do as an individual, as an IC. And then Uxbridge is a pretty good hub for corporate. So you had Xerox that was there, you had Parexel, probably still there as well, Ari Media, Anadarko is an oil company up the top there. So you still remember now all the leads and names. But then a company called Insight moved into the same building, which you're familiar with. And I'd started to see a lot of their team start coming downstairs. So I'd gone to their HR team, spoke to them about actually subsidising a benefit, and we did a corporate sign-up for the teams. So I was then meeting all of the Insight people as they came through. I won't name drop all of them, but the sales directors, sales managers, I was meeting them as they came through. And it got to the point where I was asking them, what is it you guys actually do? Seeing a lot of people come down, they seem quite happy about where they're working. There was a room there, a PlayStation in a games room up there, and I loved the idea. That was a trigger. And so I started asking them, what would I have to do in order to be able to work where you work? What would I have to study? What would I have to learn? Because this education penny had definitely dropped for me by then. And I know personally that my dad had gone to night school because he hadn't done too well in school. So I knew there was an option to go to college of an evening after I'd finished work. So I hadn't ruled that out. And they said to me, look, the only way in is a grad program, but you need a degree to do that. And I thought, I'm definitely still not going to go down that path. So I just challenged and said, look, why not put me in the same bucket as all the other grads? What sort of things are you going to ask them in the interview? If it's deeply technical, fine. But if it's commercial, sales orientated, you guys signed up fairly quickly for the offer that we put towards you guys. I'm sure I can pick some of this up. And it was that's egotistical and a little bit arrogant, but I just needed to step out of the comfort zone to really push them and challenge.
And ask for the opportunity then, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So so they said yeah. So I went to the graduation induction day and the assessment centre. So there was about 30 of us in this assessment centre, all sort of cringily sitting in a suit that didn't fit us, sitting on your hands in a reception area waiting to be called out. And then I went into an interview with a sales manager and a sales director there, and they put me through my paces, and I thought, not a chance, I've absolutely blown that. And then they came back to me and said, actually, we're going to take you on as part of the grad programme, but we have to be really clear. There's only 4 roles that are going to be available at the end of the grad programme. We're taking 15 of you on initially. Honestly, that didn't phase at all, because I was so excited about the chance to just be part of that, because I thought they're just entertaining this. I've got friendly with them in the gym and they're thinking, oh, bless him, we'll let him have an interview. Let him have a chance. So I couldn't believe when I'd actually been given an offer to do that. So I'd started at Insight and started in a team where they'd, typically said, this is how many dials you need to make. This is what you're going to be selling. There was a company called Action that they'd acquired, and there was a system that you had to learn how to input sales data, and if a customer wanted a cable or a data center, Insight were going to sell it. So you'd work out what your markup was, what your margin was, you'd negotiate with a customer really quickly. That was what the sales teams were doing. What we were doing was going through Excel spreadsheets, which were literally which had the headline Deadpool, and you'd go through and you look at the company names on there, and they'd have, top 4 consultancies, biggest banks in the world, and I'm thinking, that's all I've got to go on. If those people in these strategic teams must have had a go at those, what on earth am I going to do that's different to be able to pick one of these up?
So you already had the awareness at that age to sort of think, what if they've been successful, they're not even getting them in. What am I going to do different?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was just some self-awareness and not trying to run before I could walk. So looking at them thinking, let me go and spend some time with them on their lunch break and ask them, did you do a good deal last month? How did you go about doing that? Just making small talk without being too needy, and try and pick out some snippets of some of the conversations they were having. Because it was a close-knit call centre, really. So you could listen to a lot of people's calls. So just trying to observe and learn as fast as possible. I ended up getting into this position where I looked at, actually, we're being paid on profit, not paid on revenue, and that's what we need to retire. And some of the lowest peripherals had the biggest markup. So if you could go down that road, I don't need to sell a data center to be successful. I could just shift cables here, which had like a 90% margin on them.
Shift another day and you make a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. So I just started to look at, one, I go in at low end, certainly because if I'm going to build trust of a customer, and I'm going to walk in 18 years old in my dad's suit with spots all over my face, they're not about to say, yeah, I'll tell you what, you're the guy we're going to send the millions of pounds to help us build
Instant
a DC.
credibility there, Marc.
I just thought, actually, let me just be open and honest with them and say, look, I imagine you get a lot of these calls and a lot of other people that come through. Why don't you be really transparent about the markup? I was really surprised to see 90% on here. Why don't we just go half straight down the line at 45%? And I'll be surprised if anybody's offering you any lower than that.
And you had that much autonomy to be able to do that in those sort of deals?
Yeah, at Insight at the time, you could literally change it to a cost figure. So you could go as low as what the cost was, and it was like 20% on that. Because I think a lot of people had to have cables as part of an overall solution they were selling, and that was where they were able to be really flexible on cost towards the end. So they were practically giving those away towards the end. That's the sort of route to go down to get the first customer and build a bit of momentum. And started to get some good relationships with customers off the back. I just built trust. They built trust really quickly.
And this is all from net new, from the Deadpool?
Yeah, from that Deadpool list, yeah. Go in, put the account number in. It's not an account, it's a customer with some horrible notes against it. And we didn't have LinkedIn then either. So you couldn't go on LinkedIn and start searching around to find out, well, who should I talk to alternatively instead? You'd have to pretty much go against the notes that you could find. And when it says, this person says, please don't phone. Right, okay. Let's find someone else to call then. It was interesting because you get to work with some people that have been doing it for such a long period of time, and you get exposure to them really, really quickly. So you could take an example of saying to somebody, as long as you weren't dressing it up as coach me, help me, And he'd say, I'd literally walk over to a strategic team and say, hey, person A, what are you doing in the next half hour? Do you fancy a quick game of FIFA? And whilst I'm playing FIFA with them, that's when I'm saying to them, hey, look, I've got this customer I'm working with at the moment, struggling to get them over the line to actually just get the first meeting. What sort of stuff do you say to get your first meeting? Tap, 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 tap.
So you were naturally seeking out advice as you were learning?
Without trying to come across as this needy newbie that was desperate for information, and trying to build a rapport with them that way. And also, because then it's not a case of me saying that this was a conscious coaching effort now. Now I look back at it and realise by getting them to play FIFA or whatever it was at the time, I was tapping into their unconscious bias for what they do naturally, rather than them sitting down and thinking about, I would have got all the ego with it. Well, listen, Mark, this is what I did, and we would have got the big
turn
deal
up, be
story.
awesome, and
exactly.
Don't do nothing.
They're not really thinking about it. They're just quickly giving me some snippets of information, the really good bits. And there's things in there that you still think about now, about just making sure you build rapport, earn trust, be authentic. All those sorts of things are still true today.
What kept you motivated to sort of get those customers on? Deadpool customers, and kept on the phone, and the drive. Where was that coming from?
Yeah, good question. One that I'd seen, a lot of people would come from some amazing universities with, firsts, masters, others which had come from really privileged backgrounds. And this isn't like a rags to riches story. I certainly didn't go without when I was younger, but it was that burn and desire to prove to people that you could do it. Because outside of any sort of sporting achievement, I hadn't achieved anything really in a business world. And it was fast money. You're getting paid at the end of a month. You could see what profit margins were there. So you would dream up, actually, if I do a deal that size, you could work out, you didn't need an Excel sheet and a calculator to work out what you get paid. If you're getting 15% of everything you make or 10% of everything you make, that wasn't a bad way to go. So it's that desire to be able to look at it really quickly and think, look, they're not asking for rocket science here. They're just asking for you to speak to customers, build a rapport, sell stuff they've already bought before, and do it in a trustworthy way.
So do you think whether you're a graduate trying to get into our industry or someone like with your background, you'd come out of school and you got into a job, do you think hunger is the natural most important ingredient to be successful in sales?
Yeah, because I think even now when I'm interviewing people, certainly at Microsoft, one of the key things I'm asking people in interviews is about their learning culture. How do they learn? How do they like to learn? Because that's such a strong skill set. And their education is naturally a measure of how they learn. But that's for a period of time in their life. And I didn't learn at all during that period of time in my life. So I'm not going to judge somebody on the back of a grade they've got previously. But I'm really intrigued to see, do they read a lot? Where do they learn? How do they learn? Do they enjoy it? What do they do if they're struggling on a particular subject? Because that's how if you're naturally inquisitive around something that's of interest to you, people talk about their passion and making sure that work is their passion. It's not the passion for everybody, but if you have a passion to learn and to improve, that's where that sort of burning desire comes from, in the drive. Because the drive just to earn money will only last for so long, or your company or your industry will struggle for a period of time, and then you can't flip industries all the time.
No.
So so many people say, it's so much of it's luck as well, right? Luck, right time, right place. But you also have to make sure that you're in a space where you have an element of understanding and a passion for what it is that you're doing. Because that learning culture is so important.
Okay, great. So, Insight, how long were you there?
I think it's just shy of, 2 years? Was it just over 2 years? Yeah.
So you've been successful in it, and then where did your career take you after that?
So I remember just before I'd left Insight, so I was they just started to verticalize. So we'd gone through this whole grad thing of only so many people being offered roles, and I'd gone into a team which was finance predominant in a vertical. And then I remember only doing it for about 3 months in that vertical team, and I got a tap on the shoulder from the sales director at the time. And he'd said to me, look, I'm going to try an experiment, okay? And just want to see how this goes. And they were moving from this hard push of how many dials, how many calls, how many minutes, and moving more towards solution selling and wanting to find people that could be strategic thinkers. So I thought, why is he tapping me on the shoulder?
Yeah, with your studying background, that was an obvious choice.
And I genuinely thought at the time, he's listened to my calls where I'm 2 dials away from leaving the office, and he's heard me phone my friend Bobby, and just trying to get my last 2 calls in so I could leave the office. But they were listening to calls, and there'd been one or two that had gone well. So he'd said to me, look, listen, I'm going to move you into that strategic team, which at the time was about 6 people. And he said, on average, it takes about 3.5 years from someone to go from the position you're in now into that strategic team, sometimes longer. I'm going to move you in there now, and I'm going to ramp your target up really quickly. I'm going to see how long it takes for you to do that. And I think the naivety in me thought, that's amazing. I didn't realise how quick the ramp up of target was going to be. The one area where I felt slightly more comfortable was all the people I'd gone and sought some guidance from were in that team. So I imagine he would have got some form of clarity from that team first to say, do you know him? Have you listened to his calls? Can you work with him and stuff like that? Right. So I'm hoping I would have got some validation from them first, right? So I went in and I sat right next to that strategic team, and I was working with them really closely. That was by far one of the best learning experiences I've ever had in my career to date, because you're amongst the people that are doing it well. You're learning all the quick little tricks of the trade, literally in the system, which things you can discount, which things you can't discount, where customers will call you out, where they won't, what were the fast growing areas, where people were having success, how they were managing the bigger strategic deals. And at the time there, everything was in Cisco hardware and Microsoft licenses, the big EAs, because Insight bought a company called Software Spectrum. So there was a lot of the licensing conversations that were happening a lot of the time. And that was probably a step too far for me on some of the licensing deals at the time. So I was being coached quite heavily by the sales manager at the time who was helping me through some of those deals. And I think the target was about 15k margin. I had 2 big EAs land in the same month, which worked out to about 120k margin. And it was pretty cringeworthy at the time. You had to ring the bell for the amount of margin. For every 1,000 you'd achieved over target, you'd ring the bell. So I remember sitting there thinking, I'm going to have to ring this over 100 times, 105 times, sitting there ringing this thing out. But I'd done the commission check in my head too and thought, I'm going to earn more than my dad this month, in a year, that he would get in a year. I remember going home and saying to him, hey, Dad, I think I'm going to get paid this month. And he said, oh, no, look, Marc, I don't want to patronise you, but you're wrong. Like, you're just not going to get paid that. I was like, well, no, I am. I know it works, Dad. No, that can't be right. And I remember being paid it, and he fell off his chair at home. And I wish he'd given me a bit more guidance on how to spend it, because I'd gone and bought, at the time, a brand new car, which I couldn't drive. I bought an Audi TT. I bought an Audi TT because Solid Crew were driving those at the time, so why not? Yeah. That's what I wanted to drive. Couldn't drive it, broke the clutch 3 months after the warranty ran out. Had to get a loan out to be able to fix the car. That's how bad, we all make mistakes. That was a bad money management decision. I wish I'd have bought a flat and rented it out. So didn't do that. And so at the time, the deals that were going well were Cisco deals. That was a lot of the stuff that I was working on and going really well, because I was just finding that once customers had made an investment there, it was a huge decision to rip out and replace. So once you'd started to be that supplier of trust, that worked really well. I started to talk to the vendor manager and then started to try and work out, actually, I think that's the place to go. And I'm pretty sure that's when I met you, actually, talking to you about, hey, look, I can't get an in through Cisco directly. And then so I'd started to talk to a few recruitment companies, and you said, actually, it's not Cisco directly, it's Convergys, but why don't you go down this path? And so I went and worked over at Cisco, Convergys. Yeah. Right.
And so tell me about your career there. So that you moved into the Cisco sales team at Bedfont Lakes?
I did, yeah. And, I really enjoyed my time there. Some people that I still talk to, it's such an incestuous industry in tech anyway, right? So you come back across people quite a lot. And I actually think that's something that's really important to remember, that if you drop the ball somewhere, no one's ever going to reprimand you later on in life for a mistake that you've made, but you are constantly building a brand for yourself. For every customer you talk to, every supplier you talk to, there's people in my team today that were customers of mine at other companies. So that's quite a strange thing to go through, but if you've broken trust anywhere, that will just have a ripple effect amongst the people that you work with. So I genuinely put in so much time and effort into that role to learn, to be successful, and just to work as hard as I possibly could, because that was what you put in, you're going to get out kind of role. Do
you think personal brand as a sales professional in IT is important then? Do you think that's imperative to be successful or have longevity in the career?
I definitely think so at an early stage of your career, because most of the time people are able to a lot of the interviews are competency-based interviews. Tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when. So it's really difficult if you're fairly young in the industry to tell about a time when you haven't done something where the question's relating to. Tell me about a time you've managed a deal above $10 million. If you've never done that before, you can't do it. Yeah. So that's where I think your personality, your attitude, your behaviours, and your brand is really important in a younger individual, because you're trying to build that. And it can break really quickly. So that's why I think it's so important at that stage of your career, because naturally people seek a referral. It's rare that you go into an interview for a well-paid role, well-paid job in a great company, and they just take you on face value for the interview that you're in. People have always asked around, especially in our industry, have you worked with this person before? I think the referral systems are really effective in that space, because people are asking about previous performance. You'll probably see it too. It's rare I'll see a CV where somebody's put achieve 50% in that year or achieve 60% in that year, right? You're trying to find out what's the relevance of them doing 105%.
So would you, when you're interviewing people, would you go and seek out, say for instance they'd worked at Cisco or Rax, would you naturally go and seek out referrals and the background on them before taking them on?
Yeah.
Every time?
I would always ask them for their referrals and their references.
You'd ask the interview?
I'd ask the interviewee, because I'm interested, one, how long does it take for them to bring those references back? What type of people and roles have they decided to go to for those references as well? And I'll always follow up on them, because they're so valuable. And you would never get a bad reference. You'd never put somebody in there that's going to give somebody a poor reference. What happens is people just don't come back to you on it. So if I said, hey, look, Marc, can you give me a reference for your time at Rackspace? And if I'd worked there previously myself before, close to 5 years, I'm expecting some similar names back to what might come back. If I get nothing back, I think that screams out alarm bells, right? Yeah. You think, right, this person's worked somewhere for a long period of time and they can't pick out two names. You'd hope you get two names back, right? So yeah, that's why I think it's really important. Yeah.
So your career at Cisco, then where did you go?
I had a strange move. So I was asked about this actually in my Microsoft interview. Why did I make a move into recruitment? And I didn't really. So I went to work for a company called Hayes IT. Yeah. And I bumped into one of their MDs at an IT conference. And he'd said, look, I'm really trying to build a channel model. We don't have it at the moment. I've got a big book of contractors. And what's happening is I'm putting people on site for a SharePoint project. And they're asking me for 4 project managers, 6 developers, whatever. And we're not shifting anything with it. And actually, when I think about the value of that project, how long they're on site for, I'm pretty sure there's a big amount of software and hardware I could shift off the back of that. But I don't have any relationships with any disties. I don't have relationships with any resellers. And I want to be a systems integrator. And I thought, well, that's
strange move.
That's a strange move. And I said to him, how does the model work? And he'd said, actually, look, we're a big enough ass to kick if this goes wrong. So our value add to the customer is you're going to have these people for what we think would be 4 months worth of work. So we'll charge you for 6 months worth of work on a fixed price fee. Anything that's project run over, we'll cover. And that was the value add to the customer. So I could see where that would add value. Certainly in public sector, spend it or lose it budget, that would work well. Yeah. But I don't know if you could build trust in the commercial environment for people to purchase hardware from a IT recruitment company. Turns out that was a tough gig.
Convince them.
But we had some really good projects in public sector, certainly in NHS and health. So we'd gone down that path, and we'd set up some disty relationships. We'd set up some relationships with some resellers, so we could go down a software procurement route too. And it got to the sort of 2-year phase there where that was all established. And then I just found myself going door to door through that process of having conversations with customers about their projects. And a fascinating world and industry to be part of for the period of time, but I just didn't enjoy the culture. And every customer I talked to was just genuinely talking about, we'd rather outsource this, we'd rather go down a hosting route, fast, UK Fast, one-on-one, Rackspace had come up a few times. And I think then trying to always keep my finger on the pulse by listening to customers were talking about some of those key organisations they've been working with. And much then that's when I thought, it's time to move on here, and I need to go into that world and move back into a direct IT value add solution sale. And that's when I think got back in contact with you again. And said, hey, look, I've made this strange move. I have enjoyed it, but I really need to look at something different. And you'd also mentioned Rackspace at the time. So yeah, went for my interview with Rackspace.
And that's a big chunk of your career now and your success of how you've then gone into management. So tell me how you kicked off there. How, you started in sales and then tell me your career from there.
So I joined Rackspace as a individual contributor. At the time, they didn't have a cloud. There wasn't the concept of cloud then. So they were shifting numbers of servers, and as technical as it got was for, do you want Windows or Linux with this server, and how many do you think you're going to need? Sometimes, probably should put a firewall in front of that. That's the sort of conversations that they were having. So what was really, really enjoyable about that organisation, and I believe it's definitely something that's still there today, such an amazing culture to be part of, where you'd have the same type of sales environment where you've got high performers, some people are on performance plans, so that natural conversation in the corridor for how you enjoy your job, I'm not, or I am. It's not like everybody's happy 100% of the time. There's no organisation, I think, where that exists, right? But for high performance, it certainly was well rewarded, not as in a commission check, but recognition. And I think for a lot of people, money and recognition in a sales environment sometimes goes hand in hand. And I've seen people that feed off the recognition more than they would on the funding and the fees off the back of it. So such a fascinating place to join, because it had that probably stereotypical now, but Silicon Valley tech sort of culture, ice creams, different, Halloween, pretty much everyone was downing tools and going into some sort of like weird setup for like a haunted house in the middle of a sales floor that people were doing. And then on Valentine's Day, there's office angels coming around giving people massages whilst they're at their desk. And Christmas was an amazing Christmas parties where it wasn't that money was an object. They were just really recognising key performance, because everything for them was their branding of fanatical support, and that's ultimately what you were selling. As much as you were trying to shift some hardware or services off the back of it, the key value add was the support, and that support came through because they just really looked after the people.
As an employee, so if clients are listening to this and they're thinking culture is important, and you mentioned it there, how do you think people can look at their culture and then make it better? You've said it was a fantastic culture. What things? It can't be just ping pong tables and parties and Valentine's Day parties and stuff. So how does it actually get to become a good culture?
I remember somebody saying to me at Rackspace, this place has changed. I'm like, why? What's wrong? They're like, there's no table tennis balls upstairs anymore. The table tennis table, and just facepalm moment. I just thought, you didn't just say that, did you? And that was someone that only ever worked there, so they didn't have a perception of what I felt was reality from outside of that organisation. And they were consistently in top 100 for places to work, and that individual had just been so used to and accustomed to that culture. So I think, to answer your question, the culture's just it's not in the benefits package, right? You don't read it and go, I get free cycle to work, I get childcare benefits. Those things are great, but they're all almost now become a point where you'd ask questions if childcare benefits weren't there. If they weren't, yeah. And flexible working wasn't. It wasn't there. So they were definitely pioneering in that space for a period of time, whilst everyone else was trying to catch up. But it was the way they recognised talent and the way that they recognised key performance, that they'd go into the detail of how you constructed a solution, how you worked with your peer groups. They used Net Promoter Score, NPS, with their customers. So naturally, if you're a 9 or a 10, that's a promoter. Anything I believe 6 and below, that's a detractor, and 7 and 8 in the middle is neutral. Yeah. So they would do programs where they drive for 65 with customers. They'd use the same sort of NPS internally on a poll with peer groups, with managers. So recognition from your peers in sport and business is always the best type of recognition most people can ask for, because it's authentic and it's genuine. And that was part of the culture, that you knew, if I really put the effort in here and I really go above and beyond what I think is encompassing of the role, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get recognised for that. Even if it's just a nomination for what they had as a straitjacket at the time. This fanatical, you're so fanatical you'd be put in a straitjacket. It was fun. So you just knew, I'm going to get recognised for the work I do, because there's nothing more destructive than feeling like you gave it absolutely everything and then it wasn't recognised at the end of the day. So I think it's less about trying to have to build that high performance culture. I think it's more about the fear factor if somebody goes past the point of belief, where for instance, if I say to my team, look, we had a pretty, say they were just shy of target, and I said to them, I want everyone to be 30% better next month. We have to really step it up. A lot of them will look at it and go, 30%? I put in everything I possibly could. They've gone past the point of belief where they think it's believable. But if I have a conversation with them to say, what does 5% more look like? Do we think we can get over the line for that? Hoping that they'll go, well, 5% sounds easy. I think we can do a hell of a lot more than 5%. I'm trying to find that bit where it's believable for them. And I think part of the culture is making sure that people feel that they're going to be recognised for their achievements. And as a manager and a leader, it's trying to stay close enough to the detail that you can appreciate what good and great looks like, so it doesn't go missing, because that's how people leave really quickly.
Because it's interesting, because there was a lot of companies that did the ping pong tables and the snooker tables, and the pioneers of that, like you said with Rackspace. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon of that now. So I go to companies and they say, well, look, we've got a great culture, we've got a ping pong table, we've got a free dartboard, and we take them away. And I think they're still riding on the back of that. But it's interesting what you said there around people being valued and appreciated, because I don't think a lot of companies think that's culture. They think that's a given. And it's not really, is it? Because recognition in most companies still isn't there all the time.
Yeah.
It's almost like, oh, actually, you've got a job, just get on with it.
Yeah, and I listened to, you'll be glad to hear, I listened to the Channel Chat podcast, right? So I listened to Stuart talk about something he was mentioning in one of his pods, which was trying to make sure you measure the right thing, and him having a talent for measuring the right thing rather than trying to measure everything and just drive people towards it. And I think that's a vitally important skill in those building cultures, because the team often, if you lose respect as a leader, it's because you're trying to measure everything, and they know what they feel they need to do to be successful, and you're measuring them on the wrong KPIs. So for me, part of the building of the right culture is the trust that you build with that team, for them to give you some of that feedback for, this is where I've been successful in the past, this is what customers are saying to me, and this is how I think I can do more of it, so that you're measuring them on the right things to drive that performance. And that culture at Rackspace, yes, there was all those other things outside of that, but I'm sure there is still today too, having worked with them recently, is that drive towards fanatical support still. It's still at the heart of everything that they're doing.
As a salesperson, could they measure that though, measuring fanatical support?
Because those customers were stickier, they'd stay longer. If a customer generally bought into the support that was there, and you'd given them a feel for meeting those people, that the tour of that office wasn't just here's a nice facility. It was saying, here's the service delivery teams you're going to be working with. If you have an escalation and you need some form of Premier support, that's what 15 minutes response time looks like. These are the people you'd speak to. Here are the solutions architects. So it was real. It became real to the customer, that if that was their business and their world, and everything was going to be hosted with and outsourced really to somebody else, that they could build trust, and that's how you build trust. So the measurement was in the performance of the sales number, because if you hadn't built that trust with customers, they just weren't going to spend the money, because it was a cost battle with a lot of competitors. UK Fast at the time was coming up really as a common challenge for, actually they're charging X amount of pounds per server, and we need 10 servers and so on and so forth, and we were charging a premium for that. So you just weren't successful if you couldn't talk to a customer about the reality of what fanatical support looked like.
Do you think that culture made you want to be better at sales, and as well it helped you in your performance?
Yes, I think that for a period of time I felt like there was a stigma to being a salesperson, that you'd have a conversation with a customer, you'd almost try and hide it.
Yeah.
You say, I'm an account manager. What's that? And you start talking about it, and they go, so you're in sales? And you just get really funny about thinking, well, what am I going to say? I'm not a CIO, so I can't have this peer-to-peer conversation. So I think as long as you were transparent about the conversation you're having with a customer, they could always notice it straight off the bat anyway if you were sales or not, because they'd naturally challenge you on a few technical questions, and the majority of the sales org weren't deeply technical. That wasn't there where they'd see themselves being successful. So I felt as long as the transparency was there, that was fine. In order to be more successful, often a case that you would, I know it sounds really low level, but you're asking customers for referrals. We weren't stuck to a set number of customers or account lists. So often there would be, if you're working with an IT charity, there was CCITDG, Charity Consortium IT Directors Group. So there's a group of the top charities in the country that get together once a quarter. If you'd started selling to Oxfam, then you could go and work with them and know that Comic Relief and everybody else would be there once a quarter. So if you know you've done some great work, which is something I'm really keen to continue working with my teams today, is that one-to-many, how you scale. Go and get yourself present, talking about great stories, great customer success environments with a customer, because that's, if you can get a customer to tell that story on your behalf, which is why sort of publicly referenceable use cases are so important now, because that's where the authenticity comes from straight away, as opposed to me standing on stage in front of a group of customers saying, let me talk to you about the great work that we can do. You know, it sounds so much stronger because it's genuine when it really comes from the heart of the customer. Do you think
the best salespeople get referrals? That's what they're good at.
Yeah, 100% in any line of business, because in order for you to have a great experience when you're buying a car or buying a house, you'd happily refer people where you know you've had a great service. And actually, in the industry at the moment, we're moving more and more to the space of less month end, quarter end, and a consumption based world. So that month end hasn't gone, it's almost daily. You know, you're in a really competitive environment where you're constantly working with customers to understand how you can help them achieve more, because you know the byproduct of them achieving more is a growth mindset, and they'll continue to grow. So you're not going to find yourself, I don't think, in a space where you're talking to a customer about, hey, look, I know you're purchasing this much from us at the moment. If you purchase that little bit more, then maybe we can talk about a discount off the back. That's not the conversation to be having with customers. You need to be having conversations with customers about what's going on in their industry, how people are being disruptive, what digital transformation looks like in their industry, where you've seen other customers being successful, where you can help them as an org and help them learn, help them go faster, quicker. That one-to-many environment's really, really important. So I think it's less now about, certainly not about the activity. There's a baseline for where you need someone to be at. Just to paddle fast enough to keep up with their peer group. But it is absolutely about people that can harness that. Have you built trust with your customer? Have you managed to understand what success looks like for that customer? And then have you had a strong enough engagement where they'll publicly reference the work that they've done with you, which is a referral? So yeah, definitely.
And that's hard to achieve for some people, isn't it? I think there's enough to actually do the activity to paddle faster, but to actually get reference from customers to actually stand up and say, oh yeah, I did this great work with Marc and I'll reference him and he's been great, or etc. It's quite difficult to get.
Yeah, I also find that there's people I've managed in the past where they've done some great work and they just haven't asked, or they've asked right at the end of that process. So you can talk to a customer. Some of these sales cycles are over a year, 18 months. So you set an expectation with a customer about what good looks like, so you're all on the same page. They'll talk about aspirationally where they want to get to. There's nothing wrong with getting to the second milestone of that project and asking a customer then to reference what we've done so far, what we need to do next, and where you want to get to at the end of it, for them to then loop back round when it's been really successful at the end and talk about it again. Because most of the time, when you get to the end of that project for them retrospective, most of these things are an end game. Digital disruption's not, we tick the box, we've just digitally transformed, done. It's a constant, continuous thing. So you have to capture it with the customer at the right time and find the right customer that's willing to do it. Okay,
great. So you're in sales and you get a chance to go into management. Tell me about how that came about.
So when I was at Fitness First, I managed a team for a period of time there. So I was 19 and managing a team of 6, and that was eye-opening. Because that culture was so people were so blasé about coming in and out of work, and the office hours were sort of 7 a.m. and sometimes till 11 o'clock at night when the gym would close. So I always felt that I had to be present, so I was just doing crazy long hours, managing a team, because I felt like I had to be on top of it and have it there. And I wasn't doing well in the first couple of months of doing that, because no one wanted to be observed, no one wanted to be watched. And you can listen to a call, but imagine walking around a gym showing somebody the office, and then I'm just standing 2 feet behind you observing the sales cycle. It's just, what are you doing? So that was challenging. So you realise you just have to start trusting people really early on, and you're either glass half full or glass half empty. And I prefer to say to a team, why don't we just start at glass full? Okay, why don't we just talk about, I'll give you my absolute trust, because we've all gone through an interview process, we're all working for a company we believe in, so let's start there, rather than me feeling you've got to prove to me. Who am I to say you've got to prove to me that I can trust you? Yeah. So let's start up there. I just felt that naturally that can bite you sometimes. You've got to have some safety mechanisms and ripcords into how you handle those situations, but often people reciprocate the trust. Yeah. So I always found that just actually building the trust initially is extremely important, because if you don't have the trust of your people, you're just going to struggle from the offset. And you shouldn't feel that it's upon you to be able to prove value or prove that you can demonstrate why they should trust you. That should just come through the behaviours you model and then through the interactions you have with them. Because if you try to be authentic, you're not. It just has to come that you can add value through the things that you do. Otherwise, it's only a window of opportunity you've got to try and do that. So I did a few management roles there, and then we talked about moving into Insight, and I never managed a team at Insight. And when I'd got to Rackspace, I really, really wanted to make that move into a management role, and I could only do that from credibility. If I'd have gone into a management role at Rackspace from day one, so friends that are there now that I'd have been managing, they would have eaten me alive. They've absolutely torn me apart. So it was good to be able to observe some of the key managers that were in those roles then and how they operate and work.
How old were you when you got your first management opportunity in tech? So at Rackspace,
26. Yeah,
which is a young age for a lot of managers. And how did you gain credibility with people older than you and they've been there longer?
Yeah, so I was an IC in an enterprise sales team, and then I went to be a manager in a lead generation team. So they had a target, so it was everything in a sales cycle and a sales funnel, apart from their funnel finished when they handed over an opportunity. Because I just wasn't going to step straight into an SMB sales manager role or vice versa. So I'd started off in a lead generation role. And to this day, some of the conversations in one-to-ones I've had there, I feel fully prepared for anything that's going to be thrown at me, because the average age of the individuals was, straight out of university normally. So they just had no real concept of the working world. So there was no filter. Some of the, I won't share on here, but some of the horrific conversations they'd have in one-to-ones about personal stuff, and I just wanted to build trust. I just did not see some of those conversations coming my way. So you learn how to handle difficult conversations really, really quickly. And then how to manage the focus of how do I build trust with them, but get them just to focus on driving a sales funnel. How is what they're going to do in their conversations, in their chat conversations on a chat portal, how is this going to change? And I found that gave me such a strong grounding for the qualification phase of a sales cycle. And I alluded to it a minute ago, this sort of consumption world that a lot of us have all moved to and are moving to. I think if you asked a salesperson 5 years ago, where are you really strong? What's your strongest area? Closer. I'm a closer. I get the deal done month end, quarter end, year end. I smash out the park. That's where I'm strong. And I hold real strong value in qualification, because in the tech world, if you're at the right type of tech company and the right ISV, the right vendor and the right reseller, often it's because you're adding value to a customer. So it's how do you scale? And you can only scale effectively when you've qualified effectively. You can't just possibly go carte blanche across the entire pipeline. So if you've asked the right questions in the qualification phase, you've got the stronger leads, you've got the stronger opportunities. And so that gave me a really strong grounding for what sort of questions should we be asking the lead generation team when they come in to get the sales cycle shorter, average value higher, the close ratio more successful too. And I felt that I could start to see that coaching element of the right type of lead, the right type of op come through, and then start to talk about, that was when the timing wise, Rackspace had just launched OpenStack. So OpenStack being the open source cloud they'd developed with NASA, put that out there into the market, and you could go and procure cloud from Rackspace at the time. So then I'd start to put together a very back of a fag packet business case to say, we don't have an out-and-out cloud sales team. I really think that we could get some of the leads from those conversations into that cloud sales team. It's a different sale for how many servers plus fanatical support. The cloud's different. So that's how I'd done that. I got a lot of support from a management tier then to say, I think there's a business case for that. None of the other managers really wanted that job because it was so new, and it was an average order value was a hell of a lot lower. When you could talk to customers about gold standard storage and SSD drives and sell thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds worth, and then you could say, well, cloud files starts at 12 pence per gig. Sales teams didn't want to go anywhere near it because they think cloud was a dirty word. Do not get on a call with a solutions architect when I could do a deal for 10k and the customer comes back and says, actually, I can do that for £150. So they just didn't want to go anywhere near it. So that was my first step up there, really, into taking on a revenue target.
That's a leap of faith thing, because that could have gone wrong.
Yeah, and I think that it was a leap of faith, but it was a leap of faith in me from that management team, and I'd put a lot of effort into networking across that organisation. But I had absolute confidence in that being successful because I was seeing all the chats come through. I was seeing all the lead generation come through. I was seeing the quality of the leads, and not in no disrespect to the teams that are managing the leads, looking at the lead gen team thinking, you guys can close these deals. You just need somebody technical on the phone with you to give the customer confidence. But then this is a level of patter to walk a customer through a sales cycle. So I was taking people at the lower end of the sales org and moving them into a team. So saying, actually, let me take a handful of the people out of the lead gen team and put them into an out-and-out sales role. So now we've got a bench of people that we can start promoting through the organisation as they take their first revenue target. And that was what was happening, really. People were starting off in the lead gen team, going into a cloud sales team and moving through.
What would you say? So you had obviously a successful 5 years there, and I noticed that you'd got promoted literally every year. Now, a couple of times you mentioned you'd asked for opportunities, or you presented an opportunity to the manager and you got given it. And then I remember you said the first year you'd been successful anyway. But if you were advising someone who's in sales who wants to get promoted and promoted quickly, how can they go about getting recognised within the company and then getting the actual opportunity to get into management?
So I think the promotion and the management things I look at in two different silos. I think the promotion thing is having a conversation at the start of the year with your manager for what does good look like, but what does great look like? And in order for me to achieve great, what support do I need? What help and advice do I need? Where are my gaps? How am I going to learn faster? So that when you get to the end of the year and you've achieved what you and your manager have both agreed is great, then you have the ability and trust with them to ask for the promotion. You've earned the right to do so. Don't get to the end of the year retrospectively and then go back and say, isn't this great? I think this is great. And then you've got a really difficult conversation. They say, I think you could have done a bit better. Yeah. No one's really, as a sales manager, going to turn around and go, do you know what? High five, you've been the best out of everybody this year. Because then you're in the 1% club. So how do you get yourself in a position where you say, this is what I think great looks like for the year? Set an expectation out early. The clever part will be making sure that you put the bar as low as possible with them, and for what great looks like. Overachieve, yeah. Set the expectations low, but you're going through that process of setting out an expectation, I think, for the promotion cycle, so that when you get to an end of the year, you can be really confident in this is what we talked about, this is what we thought great looked like.
And you did that all the time, every year. You're trying to get
with each manager. I'd say, hey, look, this is where I'm at the moment. What do you think my gaps are? So the self-awareness, where do I need to improve? What can I get better at? Building a network to get that advice from peers as well as people that you probably don't like that much, because that's where the real honest feedback comes from, and work on it. And then you get to the end of the year and you feel like you've got the self-assurance and the right to talk about what a promotion is.
Who taught you that, Mark? How did you understand that at the beginning of the year you should be setting out what good look like, what great looks like, and setting that expectation? Because most don't. In my experience when I've been interviewing salespeople, most salespeople are definitely not doing that. They're not. They're getting their yearly number. They're probably not thinking about the promotion or where their career's going. They're just thinking about, let's get some numbers on the board and getting the commission. So you were obviously consciously thinking about your career anyway and setting out the expectations. And who taught you to do that? Was it natural?
I'm not going to say it was natural. I think it was more observation, just seeing people that had gone through it at the same time. There's nothing wrong with copying good behaviour. You don't have to be the creative genius in the room every single time. If you've seen someone do something successful, go and copy it.
Modelling.
Yeah, you'd be daft to go, they've been really successful in what they've done. I think I'm going to go a different route though. I think I'm going to do something differently. Go and copy and go and speak to them and go and get some coaching. So I'd gone to some of the really high performers that had gone on what Rackspace at the time were calling Rackstar and the High Performers Club. Asked them how they got it, what they were doing. Most of the time it wasn't because of the number. They'd overachieved on the number to put them in the space to qualify for it, but theirs was the publicly referenceable case studies they'd managed to get hold of to do that. Yeah. And that's what Rackspace were defining as an element of great. Could you get a customer reference for what they're doing? Could you get a case study there? So I'd proactively gone to a marketing team to talk about, are there any customers in my existing account base which you think we could get some really strong stories from that you want to build a relationship with? And that importance of the network was really key. So then the success for promotion wasn't coming just from my direct manager. Then luckily I didn't really ever have any clashes of opinion, but you would go and seek additional guidance and certification from other managers or other peers to that manager in the other department. So my sales manager saying, yeah, no, I agree, I think you did well. I'd say, well, we've had a conversation with, these 3 publicly referenceable stories we've got. Why don't you go and talk to Paul at marketing and see, how we went about that story. And you wouldn't be as direct or as bold as that. You just hope that recognition came secondhand when they're talking about the work that you'd done. So I think it was the importance of getting that assurance from other people around the business, because that just built confidence in me at a younger age to think I don't need to sit here and publicly reference all the stuff I'm doing. If I do the right things and I do all the right behaviours, I'm in the right company where that will get recognised, and it will get recognised by enough people, not just my immediate manager.
Yeah, and 5 promotions in 5 years. I think anyone, in any career, whether it's fitness first or whatever, would see that as success. So, congratulations on that. Okay, Marc, so let's move on from Rackspace. Obviously, you've been successful, so credit to you for congratulations on your promotions. But then let's move on now to Amazon and how you got that job and your career there.
Yeah, so that was a lot of conversations with customers where it was so competitive in that environment. OpenStack was okay, but it wasn't flying off the shelf per se. But our growth expectations, we were achieving it and overachieving it. The reality of what was about to become a true cloud industry happened when Amazon got to AWS within Amazon got to a certain size that on an earnings call they had to split the number out. So at Rackspace, we'd all get balloons if we hit target and get the balloon up on the desk, and you'd also go on these trips and what have you. And I think, I won't quote the numbers, but we were achieving good growth, or what we believe good growth was at the time. So we were achieving our numbers, and it was in the tens of millions rather than hundreds of millions for locally what we were doing in the UK for sure. And then it got to the point where a lot of us had bought stock in different companies and like Netflix and stuff like that. So we talk, what have you bought this week and stuff like that. I mean, small numbers, right? We weren't sitting there all driving Ferraris. We're just talking about what we bought. And a few people owned Amazon. I didn't. So we were listening in on some of the earnings call stuff, waiting for it to come out. And then the AWS numbers were split out, and they were in and around the 2 billion number. And we just thought, oh my God, we're sitting there going on trips to Europe for achieving the targets we are. That's a self-service model which a lot of customers have started to buy into, and that was one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons for thinking, I know in the UK it's under 100 people still, and if you think about where they potentially hire from, we're one of the few cloud compete companies, and there was a lot of conversation at Rackspace at the time about partnering and selling over-the-top services, fanatical support on top of AWS, and I just felt that I'd worked at a vendor before at Cisco, and I saw that as a big cloud vendor, and I just felt that was somewhere that I really needed to look to move towards. So applied for, I spoke to a couple of people that I knew who had been at AWS, and everything they talked about was ringing true for what was important to me, and went for the interview process, which was unique in a number of different ways. There's they have what they call the infamous loop there. So you go through telephone interviews and screening calls and those sorts of things, and then the loop is 5 to 6 1 hour back-to-back interviews.
5 to 6 1 hour
Yeah, so you do them all in a day normally. So sometimes they're kind and you get a lunch break in between the two, but often you're there from 12 till 5, and it's in a room where it's back-to-back, person after person, and they are asking you lots of standard interview questions, right? Competency-based questions, and asking you to dive into detail of previous experiences. But it's just intense having gone through a number of those. I applied for a role as a sales manager, and I remember seeing my panel come through for the loop. And I'd had UKMD at the time. I had an MD for a tech element within there. I remember looking at it thinking, I've applied for the wrong role. I've overpunched it here. I'm going to get absolutely torn apart. But it was because of the size of the organisation, and there was very few management roles and leader roles within that UK org. So then naturally you were talking to the main SLT.
Main stakeholders,
So that was really interesting. I think talking about that whole credibility piece, one of the interesting parts of their culture is that as you go through that process, everybody has that level of respect for each other, that we know you've all been through the loop. We all know what that was like to go through it. So I think you're in a space where you're working with people that have had to go through a process which is demanding and tough, and there's no hiding in it. You might blag yourself through an interview one day, and you'll get found out pretty quickly once you start if you've genuinely blagged it. But 5 back-to-back or 6 back-to-back 1 hours, it takes some doing. So it's a really tough process. So joined AWS as a sales manager, and went into a role where it was more of a bottom-up culture for this is your challenge, this is your segment of customers, this is how many heads you have in your team. You understand your team and skills gaps and challenges and what they're good at. This is your segment of customers. Go and build a business plan, write a 6-pager, write a narrative, find out how you want this to be successful. This is going to be the growth target or the growth number that's on you. And that was a real eye opener and a fascinating process to go through, looking at the details of how am I going to build this, how am I going to be successful, and trying to lean back then to default positions of I'm not going to do this on my own. You have to do it with your team. You have to seek guidance from peers. You have to build a network internally really quickly. And especially if you're working in an environment where it's a remote working environment predominantly, you're not all in a call center or an office every day. So, if I ping you on a team chat and say, hey, Marc, can you help me out with this? Just currently throwing some ideas out there, and all of a sudden you go offline. Who am I going to ask next? And you just go round robin. I can't just walk up to you at your desk and say, hey, you got time for a coffee? I just want to run something by you. You can't really say no then, unless we just don't like each other and you walk off. So that was interesting. That whole trust piece, you have to build trust with people really quickly, because it's quite easy to go missing or not help somebody out because everybody was so busy, and as they are, we're all busy doing our own things. So that was a fascinating time to join.
As a manager, one of the things you alluded to earlier, or I think you said was one of your best skills is coaching as a manager. So how would you say your natural style is to coach people and develop them as individuals?
Yeah, so I think I've had it with my Microsoft interview actually, when a person interviewing me said, "What's your natural leadership style?" I would describe it as coaching as a natural leadership style, but I don't mean coaching in you become like a coach monster and that you sit down in a one-to-one with somebody and you feel the need to just impart your wisdom on that poor person for the whole hour, right? You're just sitting there talking at them for the entire hour. And I think there's lots and lots of different elements to coaching. One of them is making sure that you don't feel you have to be that coach. If you're understanding the detail of that individual, that you can recognize the skills gap that they may have and identify somebody within that organization that's really strong at it and go and pair them up and go and make sure that the skill set that they're looking for isn't normally in the best salesperson or the best account manager. Sometimes it's just a skill that an individual has that might be in a different team. I've seen some technical leaders give amazing presentations, and the stereotype would be the salesperson's a really strong presenter, and seen them crumble. So looking for the skills that I want to develop and then identifying that skill within each individual. So when I'm in one-to-ones with people, I don't feel like it's upon me to impart wisdom I don't have and decide that I'm going to put that on the individual. I think something I've really tried to focus on, I think once I left Rackspace, because at Rackspace I think I was trying to do one-to-ones off the bat. Right, this week I'm going to do one-to-ones. Monday, Tuesday, I'll get most of these done. Back-to-back one-to-ones. You get to the end of the day, having done them, body language is lax. I'm not quite engaged as much as I am. I'm asking the same questions to the first person I did to the last person. So that was definitely learning through mistakes and thinking I could have done a much better job there of one-to-ones and that rigor and cadence of how that works. And now today with my teams, I'll take the time and say, actually, I'll just space these out over a 6-week period. It's the same cycle for each individual, right? They still get the same level of time. But rather than an hour, I'll make it an hour and a half or sometimes 2 hours. But I'll think really detailed about what do I want to get out of this session with that individual, much like it was a customer meeting. What do they want to get out of it, and be really clear that it's going to be useful time for them. But if it's a coaching conversation, that I'm giving them the time to get there themselves. So we're 45 minutes in the old world, and I'm 15 minutes into going ready for the next one-to-one, not sitting there thinking, I'm just going to have to tell them because we haven't got time, it's going to run out in a second. Let them get there on their own. And if they don't get there, wait until the next one-to-one and give them a few things during that period of time in between to see if they can get there themselves. Because if you just impart that on them and give them the answer, you're depriving them of a learning opportunity, which it sounds a bit cheesy, but I'm genuine when I say that. If I just sit there all the time and think I'm giving people the answers, I guarantee I'm not giving them the right answers all the time. And often in those moments when they've come up with the answer themselves, I've had the self-reflection to go back and go, actually, what I would have said wouldn't have hit the mark there. What they've said is a hell of a lot better than what I was about to come out with. So just giving them the time to understand that themselves.
Great. And you're obviously your last and present move at the moment. Obviously, let's move on from Amazon now. So then your last move into Microsoft. How did that come out? How did that come about?
There's a few different things actually. So Microsoft is a very long-standing, successful organisation in the tech world, right? So that's, I think, once, I said it actually being at Insight, there was a few Microsoft license deals that went really well. So I've always looked at it as the pinnacle of where to be in the tech industry. And it wasn't anything derogatory or negative towards Amazon or AWS, right? Amazon's one of the world's largest organizations, really interesting culture to be part of. But for me, it was always about trying to work at Microsoft, because I just, not like a poster of a footballer in the bedroom and think one day I'll be that player, but working in the tech industry, for me, that was the place to be. And I'm very glad I made that move, because the size of the organization and the depth of people that are there, the opportunities are so much wider to decide at the right time, where do I take my career next? But on that whole learning journey and that learning culture, it's it's a really important part of their culture. How do you learn? How do you successfully learn? Everybody learns differently. It's not, let's sit in front of this web portal and take the content on and see if you can pass a certification. There's so many more aspects to how people learn effectively. And I just find that I really lead towards that culture and want to be able to share that with the teams and the people that are joining, and bringing people into that organisation too, to see that it's real and it's genuine. So yeah, it's been a really interesting move, and I think a few people looked at it and gone, why did you leave AWS at the time? But it wasn't a case of leaving AWS. It was a case of I knew where I always wanted to be, and that's why I made that move.
Great. So a few topical questions, the last few questions we've got for the podcast. So I said it too earlier, Microsoft Cloud Division, biggest revenue now for the first time ever. That's just on Channel News. What's your view on the market and for Cloud and Microsoft now?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I think there's a few things which naturally play in that favour. I think we talked a lot about trust and building trust, and Microsoft runs on trust, so that's a huge part for how each individual has to build trust with their customer in order to be successful, because you're just not without that. And I think in today's world that's extremely important. But if I look at the industry and the sector as a whole, I think some of the stats I've seen more recently, because I'm more focused on data and AI, 90% of the world's data that's stored today has been accumulated in the last 2 years. That's a crazy stat. So you think about where growth is going in that space. Microsoft naturally has a lot of presence and trust in its SQL platform, but also in Cosmos DB and other areas which are really fast growth and really successful. So I think that there's a natural progression towards customers seeing their journey with Microsoft on-prem, but also hybrid, and then with Azure and in the cloud. So I think it's a strong story and progression for customers that want to move to the cloud. But there's also a bigger story that sits where everything is on Azure, but it's also outside of just that infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, because there's Teams, there's Biz Apps, there's Office. You can talk about digital transformation with a customer and digital disruption and have a fully encompassing story about here's how we go from productivity tools all the way through to platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. So it just builds really strong momentum. One of the things I find really interesting about the industry at the moment is a soundbite or snippet for you, but non-tech organizations are hiring software developers at a 15% faster rate than the tech industry is. And for me, that was a surprise stat when I heard it. But what that actually rings true towards is that everybody's becoming software enabled. Everybody's becoming a tech company or having to be tech enabled in order to keep up and be agile and keep up with the pace. I heard that in terms of car manufacturers, there's over 100 million lines of code in some cars today. And you just think, is that true? And I have to double check some of those numbers and think, no, that can't be right. But then you realize actually, developers are shaping the world, developers are changing the world. Microsoft bought GitHub, and that's a huge part of our culture and focusing on the developer community. So I really do think we're in the position where we're continue to disrupt and be agile ourselves. But there's really strong trust stories with customers in an industry which is growing at a really interesting rate.
Great. Is there what would be the one thing you'd change about the industry if you could, if anything?
I wouldn't say the word change, but I'd love to see even more growth and faster adoption of diverse working cultures and diversity, and also just more of the flexible working element. And I don't mean flexible working in terms of I can just choose when I turn up to work, and if I do, if I don't. I just feel that there's so much productivity tools available to us that if we're able to communicate with our teams and our customers in many different facets and lots of different areas. It's not just a case of picking up the phone, arranging a meeting and going and seeing a customer. Whether it's LinkedIn or Teams or anything, you can contact people in lots of different ways. So I think just having an even more open mindset in the overall tech industry for how we make best use of those tools for us all to communicate, I think will lead to a stronger, flexible working environment. I think now more and more people don't necessarily assume they'll be office-based. Certainly for the younger generations that we interview and hire and the grads that come through and the interns, they'll ask the question sometimes, am I going to be based here where they're interviewing, or and we interview them over Teams, where am I going to be based? Do I get to work from home? That's a big draw for a lot of people now. It's challenging if you've got a space where you can see talent in other parts of the country, but you're trying to drag them to an office space, which they don't want to be in or is really disruptive to their family life. It's challenging. So I think even more focus on flexible working is good.
It's funny that we did a white paper recently, Battle of the Benefits. That was the number one thing people wanted, flexible working. Absolute, by a country mile, number one requirement for all salespeople in going into tech. Have they got flexible working, whether the ability to work from home or another office or laptops, whatever it is, but that was a really, really big one. So the final question I've got, and it's a great question for you to answer because you have made a name for yourself in the industry, going from having an F in IT, going to director of Microsoft, so you're in a really good position to ask this. If you were going to give one piece of advice to someone, either as a contributor or a manager, to make a name for themselves and get recognised in our industry, which as you have, what would it be? What would you tell them?
Without a shadow of a doubt, it would be to find a strong coach. You'll struggle to find a professional athlete that doesn't have a coach. So if you want to perform at your best in the industry or in business in general, why would you not have a coach? So your coach should not just be your direct manager or your manager's manager, because you've naturally got a vested interest in those conversations to present yourself in the best light possible to try and get yourself either promoted or change roles or progress. And sometimes the strongest coaches that you can seek are the individuals that are going to give you the harsh, honest truth, but you've got to be honest with them as well and show them when you're at your worst and have a conversation with them where they're going to really add value and drive your performance. So I think seeking a coach, which is an external coach outside of your immediate organisation and someone internally, you don't have to have the one, but just somewhere you can go and seek trusted advice and trusted guidance from is really important. So I would say a real emphasis on a coach or your coaching habits.
Great. Marc, it's been a pleasure interviewing you, or not even interviewing, chatting to you as the Channel Chat podcast. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us and listening to another episode of our Channel Chat podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard and are listening on iTunes, please could you give us a review and subscribe in order to get the newest episodes as soon as they're released. Otherwise, as always, we release an episode every Thursday at midday, so hopefully you can join us then.